When people talk about powerful Pokémon, Ralts almost never enters the conversation. Fans immediately think of dragons, legendary beasts, or battle monsters that can destroy entire stadiums with a single attack. Ralts? To many viewers, it's just that tiny green and white Pokémon hiding behind stronger teammates. And that's exactly why Ralts may be one of the most underrated Pokémon in the entire anime. The controversy begins with a simple question. Is Ralts actually weak, or have fans completely misunderstood what strength means in Pokémon? At first glance, the evidence seems obvious. Ralts is physically fragile. Its speed isn't exceptional. Its offensive power is limited. And compared to aggressive Pokémon like Charizard, Sceptile, or Lucario, Ralts looks completely outclassed. If Pokémon battles were decided purely by raw power, Ralts would lose almost every debate. But here's where things become interesting. The Pokémon anime has repeatedly shown that battles are not won by strength alone. They're won by timing, strategy, prediction, trust, and sometimes by abilities that are nearly impossible to counter. This is where Ralts begins to separate itself from countless other Pokémon. Unlike traditional fighters, Ralts isn't designed to overpower opponents. It's designed to understand them. That distinction changes everything. In the anime, Ralts demonstrates extraordinary emotional sensitivity. It can sense feelings, detect intentions, recognize emotional changes long before they become visible. Many fans see this as a cute personality trait. Others argue it's actually one of the most dangerous abilities a Pokémon can possess. Think about it. Imagine entering a battle against an opponent who can anticipate your emotional state, your confidence, your hesitation, your fear, your frustration, before you've even made your move. Suddenly every decision becomes more predictable. Every mistake becomes easier to exploit. And every emotional reaction becomes a weakness. This creates a fascinating debate among Pokémon fans. Is intelligence a greater weapon than power? Because if the answer is yes, Ralts immediately becomes far more threatening than its appearance suggests. But that doesn't mean Ralts has no weaknesses. In fact, its weaknesses are so severe that many trainers would never choose it for competitive battles. The biggest problem is durability. Ralts simply cannot absorb punishment the way tankier Pokémon can. A powerful physical attack can end a battle before Ralts even has the opportunity to execute a strategy. This creates a constant risk. Every battle becomes a high-pressure situation. One mistake, one delayed reaction, one failed prediction, and the fight may already be over. Critics argue this flaw alone prevents Ralts from ever being considered elite. After all, what good is intelligence if you can't survive long enough to use it? Supporters disagree. They point to a pattern repeatedly seen throughout Pokémon history. Many of the most dangerous battlers weren't the strongest. They were the smartest. And Ralts belongs firmly in that category. Another overlooked advantage is psychological pressure. Most opponents underestimate Ralts. That sounds harmless. But underestimation is often the first step toward defeat. When trainers see a small Pokémon, they naturally become more aggressive. They take risks. They abandon caution. They rush forward expecting an easy victory. And that's exactly when strategic Pokémon become dangerous. History has shown that arrogance is one of the easiest weaknesses to exploit. Ralts often benefits from opponents making assumptions. The battle begins before the first attack is launched. It begins with perception. And perception can be manipulated. This leads to another controversial claim. Some fans believe Ralts possesses one of the highest hidden potential ceilings among non-legendary Pokémon. Not because of what it is, but because of what it becomes. Every trainer knows Ralts eventually evolves into stronger forms. Yet the anime repeatedly emphasizes that growth isn't automatic. Potential means nothing without development. And that's what makes Ralts fascinating. It represents possibility, not achievement. A dragon Pokémon may begin strong. A powerhouse may dominate early battles. But Ralts embodies a completely different narrative. The journey from vulnerability to mastery. The transformation from being overlooked to becoming respected. And audiences naturally connect with that story. People see themselves in underdogs, not in unstoppable champions. This emotional connection helps explain why Ralts remains popular despite obvious combat limitations. But popularity doesn't automatically equal effectiveness. So let's ask a harder question. Who actually counters Ralts? The answer reveals perhaps the biggest flaw in its design. Aggressive attackers. Especially those capable of overwhelming pressure. Ralts thrives when it has time to analyze. Time to react. Time to understand the battlefield. Take that time away, and many of its advantages disappear. Fast physical attackers create immediate problems. They force Ralts into defensive situations. They reduce opportunities for strategic planning. And they punish hesitation. This is why many battle analysts argue that Ralts struggles against hyper-offensive opponents. Not because they're smarter. Not because they're more skilled. But because they deny the conditions Ralts needs to succeed. In other words, they attack the strategy itself. And that's a far more effective counter than simply attacking the Pokémon. Another challenge comes from unpredictability. Ralts excels when patterns exist. But what happens when an opponent becomes difficult to read? What happens when battle decisions appear irrational? Suddenly, emotional awareness loses some of its value. Prediction becomes harder. Confidence decreases. And uncertainty grows. This creates one of the most intriguing tactical weaknesses in the anime. The smarter your strategy becomes, the more dangerous chaos becomes. Order benefits planners. Chaos benefits disruptors. And Ralts is fundamentally a planner. That doesn't make it weak. But it does create vulnerabilities. The debate continues because both sides have legitimate arguments. Critics see a fragile Pokémon that relies too heavily on favorable conditions. Supporters see a strategic specialist capable of influencing battles in ways raw power never could. And perhaps both sides are correct. Maybe Ralts isn't supposed to dominate every fight. Maybe that's the point. Its story was never about overwhelming strength. It was about proving that strength comes in different forms. Some Pokémon win through force. Others win through intelligence. Some inspire fear. Others inspire trust. And Ralts may represent that second category better than almost any Pokémon in the anime. But the real controversy begins when Ralts evolves. Because many of the weaknesses people use against Ralts today eventually disappear. And once that happens, the balance between intelligence and power changes dramatically. Was Ralts secretly stronger than people believed? Or was it simply a fragile Pokémon surviving on potential alone? The answer becomes far more complicated once evolution enters the story. Because evolution doesn't just make Ralts stronger. It fundamentally changes the rules of the debate. The moment Ralts evolves into Kirlia, something fascinating happens. Many of its original weaknesses remain. But they become less severe. Kirlia is no longer merely surviving. It's beginning to influence battles. And that's where critics start to lose ground. The argument that Ralts is too weak becomes harder to defend when that same Pokémon starts demonstrating increasingly dangerous psychic abilities. Yet the real transformation doesn't occur with Kirlia. It happens later. When trainers must make one of the most important decisions in Pokémon history. A choice between two very different destinies. Gardevoir. Or Gallade. And this is where one of the Pokémon community's longest-running arguments begins. Which evolution is actually stronger? For years fans have debated this question. Some believe Gardevoir represents the ultimate expression of intelligence. Others insist Gallade is the superior fighter because it combines psychic abilities with direct combat power. Neither side has completely won the argument. And that's exactly why it's so interesting. Because both evolutions solve different problems. Gardevoir transforms emotional awareness into overwhelming battlefield control. Gallade transforms strategy into precision aggression. The same Pokémon. The same origins. Yet two entirely different paths. But here's where things become controversial. Many fans claim that once Ralts reaches its final evolution, its greatest enemy is no longer another Pokémon. It's the trainer. Think about that for a moment. A powerful dragon type can often rely on raw force. A physically dominant Pokémon can sometimes recover from mistakes. But psychic specialists are different. Their effectiveness depends heavily on decision-making. A poor strategy can waste extraordinary potential. A brilliant strategy can make an average matchup look effortless. This means the trainer's intelligence becomes part of the Pokémon's strength. And suddenly the battle is no longer Pokémon versus Pokémon. It's trainer versus trainer. Some viewers love this idea. Others hate it because it challenges one of the most popular beliefs in Pokémon: the belief that power alone determines victory. The anime repeatedly suggests otherwise. Time and time again, superior strength fails against superior planning. And nowhere is that lesson more visible than in the evolution line that began with Ralts. But that doesn't mean Gardevoir and Gallade are invincible. Far from it. In fact, their counters reveal something important. The strongest opponents are often those who refuse to play by their rules. Powerful Dark-type Pokémon create obvious problems. Psychic attacks become less effective. Mental pressure loses impact. Battlefield control becomes harder to establish. Suddenly the advantages that once felt overwhelming start disappearing. But surprisingly, some fans argue Dark types aren't the most dangerous counter at all. The true counter is unpredictability. An opponent that acts irrationally. An opponent that refuses to follow patterns. An opponent willing to create chaos. Because strategy requires information. And chaos destroys information. Imagine trying to predict a move that makes no logical sense. Imagine attempting to read intentions that change every second. Even the most intelligent battler can struggle under those conditions. This is why certain unconventional Pokémon have historically caused problems for psychic specialists. Not because they're stronger. Because they're harder to understand. And understanding has always been the foundation of Ralts' power. The irony is incredible. The Pokémon famous for reading emotions can still be defeated by uncertainty. The Pokémon known for intelligence can still be overwhelmed by chaos. The Pokémon built around understanding can still encounter things it cannot fully predict. Maybe that's why fans remain fascinated after all these years. Because Ralts never becomes a perfect character. Its evolution never removes every weakness. It simply changes the nature of those weaknesses. And that makes the journey feel real. The strongest stories aren't about becoming unstoppable. They're about overcoming limitations without losing identity. Ralts never abandons what made it unique. It doesn't become a dragon. It doesn't become a giant monster. It doesn't transform into an unstoppable force of destruction. Instead, it doubles down on what it always was. A Pokémon that wins through understanding. And perhaps that's why the debate will never truly end. Some fans will always see weakness. Others will always see hidden brilliance. Some will argue that physical power matters most. Others will insist intelligence is the ultimate weapon. Neither side is likely to convince the other. And maybe that's exactly what makes Ralts one of the most fascinating Pokémon ever created. Because the argument isn't really about Ralts. It's about how we define strength itself. Is strength the ability to overpower opponents? Or is it the ability to overcome impossible odds? Is strength measured by muscles? Or by decisions? The Pokémon anime never gives a definitive answer. Instead, it leaves the question for us. And years later, fans are still debating it. But before you decide where you stand, consider one final possibility. What if the biggest reason people underestimate Ralts is the same reason they underestimate people in real life? Because true potential rarely looks impressive at first. Sometimes it appears small, quiet, fragile, easy to overlook. Until one day everyone realizes they were judging the beginning of the story as if it were the ending. And by then, it's already too late. So here's the question. If you were building the ultimate Pokémon team from scratch today, would you choose raw power? Or would you take the Pokémon that understands the battlefield better than anyone else? Let us know in the comments. Because the most controversial Pokémon debates are usually the ones with no clear answer. And trust me, this is only the beginning. In the next video, we'll explore another Pokémon that many fans consider overrated, while others believe it may secretly be one of the strongest non-legendary Pokémon ever created.